Well, thanks for joining us here today. I'm glad at your interest and thankful for your time. Kendall and I will be doing a tag team presentation about the data-driven tools that we've developed with our co-authors to support forestry, fire, restoration, and reforestation planning with an eye towards soil carbon in the lake states. And our team, our co-authors on this work include Grant Domke, Maria Genoviak, Todd Ontel, Matt Peters, Eric Sprague, Brian Walters, and Chris Swanston. They all made critical contributions to the contents of this presentation that we'll be telling you about. And we wouldn't have been able to do it without them. So in case you haven't thought about it in a while, why soils? Why soils? Soil organic carbon is the largest pool of terrestrial carbon. In the US as a whole, about 56% of forest carbon is in soil. In the lake states, that ratio is stilted even more towards soil. Soil carbon, it's important, of course, from a global perspective in terms of mitigating atmospheric carbon dioxide pollution, climate change. When we zoom into our region, our landscapes, our stands, soil organic carbon is important on the site because it supports all manner of ecosystem processes. It's connected to regeneration, biomass production, the retention and cycling of water and nutrients in the soil, many, many other things. And I'd like to point out also that the lake states, if you just look at our study area that we're talking about today, there's 6% of the land area, but 7% of the forest land, and 9% of the forest soil carbon in the US. So, we punch above our weight, so to speak. That's a region of disproportionate importance that we're focusing on here. Why should we be talking about this now? Well, climate change impacts are worsening. The pace of climate change is faster in the lake states than many other regions of the country, and it's getting faster. We're at an opportune time socially, politically, scientifically, to connect forest management decisions to carbon outcomes and climate goals. And just a few snapshot climate change summary statistics here from GLISA to give you a frame of reference for what we've seen in the past 70 years. This is no longer future tense. We're in it. We're in it now. And I think everybody on this call has seen it in your own ways, in your own backyards. A few words about land use, management, and soil carbon. These activities can change soil carbon stocks. They can alter soil physical properties, the changes in soil structure, for example, mixing of surface horizons, if you're talking about agricultural tillage or mechanized harvest operations. Land use or management can change the quantity or quality of carbon that is input to soils. Changes in wood versus leaf versus root inputs from trees, changes in crop inputs. And also land use and management can affect soil carbon stocks by altering the processes happening in soil that change carbon between forms, different functional forms, and also move it around. So biogeochemical processes that occur. You can think about decomposition, you can think about lateral transport of dissolved organic carbon in soil water along a hill slope, things like that. We know these things are generally true, and these are the ways that land use and management can affect soil carbon. But when it comes down to the scale that most of us think about it, we just don't know with any confidence what's going to happen with a particular type of management or a specific set of tactics. And the purpose of the work that we've been doing with this soil carbon initiative is to acquire empirical data, observations, experiments, and constrain the direction of changes in soil carbon, if not the actual magnitude of those changes. The current understanding of forest soil carbon management is a mixture of really high-level generalizations, like this graph here. This is one that some co-authors and I published more than a decade ago now. This shows time since harvest on the x-axis and the net change in the forest floor carbon stock of spodosols. This was a reliable generalization to make at the temperate forest level 10 years ago. I don't know how relevant that is to an individual project in a particular place in Wisconsin, or name another lake state. So at the one end, we have an abundance of generalizations drawn from the big picture, unclear how they relate. And at the other end, there's a ton of site-specific studies where this site showed a soil carbon loss following a fire. This site showed no change, and so on and so on. As all of these primary studies, these investigations of soil carbon accumulate, it's possible to use that ever-increasing body of data and some creative analytical statistical approaches to look at intermediate scales where we can address the uniqueness of distinct ecoregions or landscapes or landforms. Why would you expect forest floors to behave the same way across as great a diversity of soil as you see in the pictures on this slide? Places are different, soils are different, management treatments are different. So what we chose to do with this forest soil carbon initiative is to address that intermediate ecoregional to landscape scale. And we're doing this one ecoregion at a time. We started with the Central Appalachians. We've got work in review now for the Pacific Northwest. Coming up is North Carolina, Southern Apps, and Coastal Plain. The lake states, nearest and dearest to my heart. How we did this? Well, first we defined the lake states using EcoMap, using the Forest Service system of hierarchical ecosystem classification. We said any ecological section present in Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Michigan, the full extent of those ecosections. That's the lake states. So that's what's delineated on this map. And we acquired 3 different data sources, independent from each other. The first of those are published papers. The points on the map, the big numbered points, are individual published studies. We found 39 of those published between 1957 and 2019 that addressed some kind of land use change or management treatment and had data on soil carbon. The size of the dot corresponds to whether you're looking at small dots are ecosystem specific, I'd say site level studies, on up to regional studies, large dots where data are reported for sites arrayed all across the region. We obtained forest inventory and analysis, Forest Service National Forest Inventory plot-based data, and we're able to make experimental comparisons, I should say observational comparisons, soil carbon from recently harvested versus unharvested control stands. And lastly, we use soil pedon data from NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, has a lot of soil observations. They tend to be better arrayed across agricultural types of sites, although there's a good amount of forest land. Those are the blue points on the map. The NFI plots are the red dots. So altogether, we wound up with 3 independent data sources. We had about 1,700 pedons from NRCS. And for those, we assessed land use, land cover by looking at the remote sensing imagery, satellite imagery of that location at the time of soil sampling. Of course, the FIA data, they tell you what has happened on that plot. That plot is a known quantity where other things are measured, biomass, stand history, and so on. And we did this to address this overarching question at the bottom. What are the main things that control soil carbon stocks across our ecoregion, and how does management affect those soil carbon stocks? Now, another aspect of how we approach this work, we wanted to not just describe patterns, we wanted to offer some options for people who see a pattern and want to do something about it. And the way we did that was to create something that we call the soil carbon tactics table, which tiers beneath the NIACS carbon menu. This is the forest carbon menu that some of you have known about. I think maybe some on the call even have had a role in developing. That forest carbon menu offers climate-informed strategies and approaches, so broad level actions for maintaining or increasing forest carbon stocks. That's all parts of the forest, not specific to soils. It's not specific to geography. What we chose to do was to name specific strategies and approaches that are supported by published literature that made it into this NIACS carbon menu, and then offer specific tactics that are intended to mitigate losses or enhance potential gains in soil carbon at more specific scope, more specific places in our ecoregion. And we developed this table based partly on the results of our data synthesis, of our analysis of empirical data from the last slide, and also a literature review. We did a thorough literature review looking for tactics that have support for, if not soil carbon, then the mechanisms that we think relate to soil carbon. And the bottom line here is, well, the bottom line. This tactics table offers support for our results by identifying approaches, strategies, and tactics that can protect or increase soil carbon stocks. The last ingredient in terms of our approach was to map our findings, basically. The first phase of this that we completed was to map probable harvest impacts in terms of vulnerabilities for soil carbon loss and opportunities for soil carbon gain. We found through our empirical analysis some key results, which I give away here in the caption of this map, and we'll talk at a little bit of length about in a moment. We found strong evidence that parent material and soil texture are what control harvest impacts on soil carbon in the lake states. So we created this as a decision support tool, this map. All right, in terms of our results, what we found, probably not surprising to most of you, place influences soil carbon a lot more than practice. We have, people from outside the lake states don't give us credit for the diversity and complexity of our soils, our landforms, our landscapes. A picture like this showing an upland ice block depression in dead ice terrain, in moraine, interlobate moraine. You can go a matter of meters and change your soil carbon stock by 2 orders of magnitude. And of course, this same pattern plays out over ever larger scales at the landform level, at the landscape level. So it's not surprising then that when we collate these 3 different sources of data, what we find is that again and again, we see evidence that physiography in terms of parent material and landform, and then soil texture, largely, though not completely inherited from physiography. These are the things that really explain why soil carbon is more here, less there, across the landscapes of our states. And in terms of our statistical analysis, we do see evidence that management matters, but it's down the list. It is a weak control compared to the fundamental physical factors. Management can act, it can wiggle within the box that's the ultimate constraint on soil carbon for any part of the landscape. Our second aspect of results that I like to share, this one I almost couldn't believe when I saw it. These are 3 different methods, these 3 panels, A, B, and C. We've got published studies analyzed by meta-analysis. This middle panel, these are the NRCS pedons, and panel C on the right, these are our forest inventory and analysis data. And what we're looking at here is a depth profile of control versus harvested soil carbon stocks, where harvested is the filled circle and control is the open circle. And at each depth, there's a point estimate for the % change with harvesting and a p-value. And the topsoil really showed a remarkably significant change with harvesting across all 3 methods, a 17 to 20% loss of topsoil carbon with harvesting. Now, I think it's important to keep in mind that at the whole profile level and for most of the genetic portions of the soil profile, there is no change. There is no detectable impact of harvesting on soil carbon. But that topsoil, that potentially fragile, disproportionately important part of the profile does show systematic evidence for decline. The part that's even more fun to think about is that this is a mean. This is an arithmetic mean of all data. And when we look at the underlying data structure, we find actually opposite trends of soil texture and parent material. So outwash parent materials and intermediate textures, particularly sandy loams and loams, these tend to have less soil carbon and they lose significant amounts, statistically significant, and probably practically significant amounts. On the other hand, if you're on glaciolacustrine parent materials, lacustrine plain, lake wash till, things like this, and the finest textures, silt loam, clay, silty clay, these have a lot of soil carbon and they tend to gain it after harvesting. So this is probably what I would like to share as the most important of the many findings of our empirical data analysis. Fire effects, fire is really important within certain ecosystem types, certain parent materials in the lake states, but it's not as big a deal, I guess I'll say, as in some other ecoregions. So data are rather limited. Nonetheless, when we use meta-analysis, the statistical technique to calculate an average change, a variance, and understand the sources of variation among published studies, we see significant changes in soil carbon stocks throughout the profile. Not surprisingly, surface horizons, your O and A horizons, tend to lose soil carbon. Perhaps surprisingly, we detected that subsoils, alluvial horizons, B horizons, BC horizons, tend to gain soil carbon. No net change at the whole profile level. As to land use change, we expected to see some trends here and were surprised at some others. So one obvious thing is we have a fair amount of mining in the lake states. We've got the Iron Ranges across the north, the Copper Country, and so on. And the data that we were able to glean indicate that compared to barren substrates or spoils removed or deposited through mining activities, if you plant trees on it, you can really increase soil carbon. Another thing that we found, perhaps not surprisingly, when we compare natural forests, native forests, to adjacent croplands, cultivation, deforestation, and cultivation, some combination of those things, decrease soil carbon. One thing that took me by surprise, since we had published on this through a range of other assessments, reforestation of croplands in the lake states has not produced detectable changes in soil carbon, according to the data that we gleaned for this ecoregional assessment. That had appeared to be a promising strategy and may yet be, but it may also be because we found a preferential allocation of land use. Another sort of thing, when you find a pattern hidden in a data set, it can be really surprising, even if it's not at its heart surprising. So what I mean here is, when you look at the distribution of cultivation, native forest, and formerly cultivated lands that have been allowed to reforest, and you look at soil textures, at pH, at rock content, you see just what you would expect. The best soils, the finest soils, the least rocky soils, sweetest pH, those are the cultivated soils. Forests are allowed to stick around on the sandy, rocky, acidic sites. And then in the intermediate, that's where you get reforestation. And it may be that reforestation is increasing soil carbon on those sites, but we can't tell just because they are marginal soils. And also related to this, we found evidence for plantations, particularly, we mostly have data on red pine plantations from around the ecoregion. These are consistently on the least productive soils, the sandiest, the most acid, the rockiest. And to my eyes anyway, I think that's probably a reflection of the old CCC shadow. So many of the reforestation projects that happened in the 30s were on the most poor soils, the most depleted soils. So let's get here to tactics. Let's talk about, all right, knowing that there are carbon losses from topsoils likely under certain conditions, what can we do about it? Well, what we found primarily through literature review, and a lot of you know this already, or do this in your work, you recognize that minimizing soil disturbance is a good way to protect all manner of soil changes, of deleterious soil impacts, microclimatic changes. So on your most vulnerable sites, for example, tactics that are well supported by evidence for supporting soil carbon, for minimizing potential losses, only, right into your specs, harvest only when soils are frozen or at intermediate moisture. And as far as those microclimatic changes, soil microclimate, the difference in soil temperature that comes just from a little bit of residue cover can go a long way towards keeping the soils cooler, slowing down that decomposition. On the other hand, there's a lot of places you saw on that map where gains are likely with harvesting. And it might be possible to capitalize on that. This picture here is an example of an experiment we did at the U of M biostation where I work. We had the processor operator drop residues in wet places, because wet places, well, they tend to accumulate soil carbon. So let's get organic matter in those wet places, keep it waterlogged, and promote some gains on these fine textured soils where you have a water table near the surface. Other options we found evidence for, and this is just a subset of many that appear in the appendix to our published paper. If you're concerned about soil structural impacts, rutting, displacement, especially on these glaciolacustrine sites with fine soils where soil carbon gains are likely, you can maintain higher residual basal area along the haul roads or the forwarder trails, just to keep that transpirational stream pulling on groundwater and prevent some of the wetness related problems. In terms of fire, we found evidence for a prioritization of fire suppression on certain landscape settings or ecosystem types. One thing that appears true is that upland marginal, those parts of peatlands that are right at the upland margins that are sensitive more to groundwater change, to cover type change, or minerotrophic peatlands that release a lot of ash. These are places that sometimes won't come back as peatlands if they burn really bad. They're already at the margins. They're already relictual of a past colder, wetter climate that caused their formation. So focus on those. Let the peatlands, let the interior lowlands that are acid, that just burn and will come back as peatlands. Prioritize those marginal sites. Another thing that we found evidence for is that upland conifers, much more of a fire history there. Soil carbon stocks seem less impacted than in upland hardwoods that have not, let's say, adapted to fire. In terms of restoration, there's a lot of pine plantations. Many people, myself included, like to pick on those, particularly the ones that have, sort of gone to seed, if you will. There's a lot of opportunities to introduce many ecological conditions and goals to places like that. So in terms of tactics we found in the literature, you can delay thinning in pine plantations that you want to build up an O-horizon. If you want pine plantations to be more like the barrens that they frequently were, or the pine parklands, pine plantations on the poorest sites, the coarsest soils, they have the least soil carbon to begin with. So if you're going to convert those to barrens, which are characterized by having little soil carbon, you've got the shortest distance to go there and the least impact on the, let's say, landscape to state level carbon budgets. You don't have to give away that much soil carbon to get back to what you want. Reforestation, there's a great literature out of this region. A lot of it's on the older side now, but that describes how to select tree species, mycorrhizal inocula, soil amendments based upon the particular physical or chemical limitations of a given mine spoil or site. In terms of how to implement these findings, the first and easiest way to do it is just think about these results and know that decisions that you're going to make when writing specs have support in published literature, including this paper. So keep in mind that soil texture and parent material, they are going to mediate harvest impacts the way you think they do. If you've got a timber sale on a fragile outwash site, well, be sure to set strict seasonal restrictions on the harvesting or the hauling. If you're on a glaciolacustran soil that's prone to soil carbon gains with harvesting, maybe you don't worry about it as much. I want to point out that I'm aware, and thanks especially to some folks who shared information on these BMPs and regulations who are on this call. There are a lot of tactics with soil carbon benefits that are already part of your existing BMPs, your guidelines, restrictions. Thus far, these things are rules of thumb, or they relate to other desired soil outcomes or ecosystem outcomes. You can make some of these decisions knowing now that you're gaining some additional benefit to soil carbon for decisions you might have been making for other reasons. And as I said on the previous slide, you can also use the results that we have found to know which sites are more or less vulnerable, where those restrictions are probably more important. I want to stress that the products we've made here, the map of harvest impacts, the decision support tactics table, these shouldn't stand alone. They should be used with other constraints and sources of information. You've got many criteria, I know, in your jobs, in how you set up projects. And I'm not arguing that this should supplant those. Other geospatial information. Use your experience. A lot of the things that you think you knew, or you did know but didn't know why, science progresses. We now have reasons for some of the things you already knew. And of course, think of the big picture. Climate adaptation, landscape level management, and so on. The last thing I want to say is, whenever it's possible, please conduct monitoring. I would love to partner with people on this. I want to stress in bold, and as regards this picture, no matter how hard you look, you will often not find the trends that we report at the project level or at the site level. The trends that we find are in large degree a function of the amount of data we can bring to bear on those questions. It may even be that some sites or soils have opposite trends than what we report here. But I think based on the amount of data, the scale at which we collected it, the things that we are offering here are not offered lightly. We tend to be careful on this team with the things that we will say about management, land use, and soil carbon. And I have confidence. You can read about our ratings of confidence in our key results in the paper. Even if you don't find a trend when monitoring, it may well be happening and perhaps better accounted for at a higher scale in your organization. So with that, I will turn it over to Kendall, who will take it to talk about some implications and implementation.
Thanks, Luke. There we go. So Luke just laid out a lot of really interesting results from our research, a lot of tactics that you can think about. And beyond thinking about how this applies at the project level or thinking about certain management units, we can start to think about this at kind of state or regional levels. As you know, we've done this analysis for all 3 lake states. It's one kind of consistent analysis. So that gives us the chance to think about how some of these tactics might apply across the region as a whole, or in any place where your soils have similar characteristics. Certainly, there's going to be a lot of different characteristics between each state. But using our maps, these maps that we've talked about, we can really use those to help identify where a lot of these tactics you just heard about might apply. So to give you an example, we have this map that shows you areas of mineland and plantation restoration opportunities in the 3 lake states. So this is from our own original analysis. We combined satellite imagery, state level forest type information, vegetation classifications, some other GIS data to map these lands more comprehensively for all 3 states than any other data set that we could find. So this is kind of new, cool information that we're excited to be sharing with you. So overall, we've identified about 38,000 acres of abandoned or kind of inactive mine lands that don't currently have trees on them that could be potentially restored using some of those tactics that Luke had talked about, some of the things in our tactics table. And you would see gains in soil carbon stocks from that restoration opportunity. So this is 38,000 acres of ready to go opportunity for more soil carbon. We made sure when we mapped these to check recent satellite imagery and rule out any mining areas that we found with evidence of current activity. If we could see trucks or machinery on site, we figured that was still an active site, and that would not make the best restoration target right now. So that took us down from about 200,000 acres total to 107,000 that are inactive. And then because a lot of those are in various states of restoration themselves, we actually calculated the area that does not currently have any forest cover on it. And that's how we got to this 38,000. So the parcels, these map parcels that you see here in blue, mine parcels, I should say, these are not currently being used. It makes them prime targets for these restoration activities, great places to start applying some of those tactics that we talked about. We focused in on known mining regions in the area, Keweenaw, Menominee, Marquette, Wasabi Ranges. There's also some opportunity in the Driftless down in southern Wisconsin, but a lot of that opportunity is pretty scattered. It's some pretty small chunks of land, like a couple acres here or there. So there may be some opportunity there, but from a kind of state or regional policy perspective, it seems more effective to focus on some of these more concentrated areas with larger potential. So then similarly for these pine plantations that we've talked about, which are on the map here in pink, we found over 2 million acres of them total in the lake states. But we know that some of those are likely currently managed, they're being used for industrial uses or production, and those, again, may not make the best restoration targets now. So we started looking at this through the lens of forest ownership to tease out some of these opportunities. So we found that if we took out the currently corporate-owned or TIMO and REIT-owned lands, then we get down to just shy of 2 million acres. So that's really, there's about 100,000 acres of the corporate and TIMO and REIT land in the lake states. And we acknowledge that this almost 2 million acres doesn't mean that every single parcel is ready for restoration. Certainly your restoration tactics would depend a lot on the location, depend a lot on your goals. This is where, again, using the knowledge that you guys already have as managers, using your local information is really important to just kind of use this at your discretion. But we're just thinking about the potential for all of this action. There are millions of acres of land across the lake states that could be restored. That splits up for these plantations. We found about 10,000 acres on tribal lands, about 52,000 on state lands. For the Forest Service, there's 315,000 of them. So a large chunk of that on Forest Service land. There's a little bit on other federal lands as well. 125,000 on local public ownership, which is kind of an interesting finding, I think. And then there's a large chunk of that, 530,000 of these acres are on other private ownerships aside from corporate. So that's looking at families or NGOs or kind of other private entities. So there's a lot of opportunity to apply some of these tactics. It's touching a lot of different forest ownerships, and that's interesting from a policy level or from a kind of larger implementation scale where you need to think about different engagement or different programs and tactics to get that restoration work going and get those soil carbon gains. Next slide, please, Luke. So thinking more about these different ownerships, just to give you a sense of how some of this data can be used or could be useful for you. We're going to zoom in on this map to look at how it all overlaps. So this area is in the UP. You can see the boundary, the border between Michigan and Wisconsin down in the lower left-hand corner of this map. And so we are still looking at the kind of mineland restoration and plantation restoration opportunities, but we've also added in a couple different key ownerships of land. So in black, you have U.S. Forest Service lands. We've got the Ottawa National Forest here. And then in orange, we have state DNR lands. So we're looking at Baraga State Forest here. And you can start to see the overlap between some of these possible plantation opportunities with different ownerships. There's a lot of opportunity in this map, but it goes through the kind of matrix of ownerships. And so from a state implementation level, it would be interesting to think about how you could focus restoration on all of these lands. What could you do to leverage the restoration activities everywhere and then really see those soil carbon benefits stack up? Next slide, please. So then if we add in this map of the harvest impacts on soil, that gets us into a little bit more of the operational level of thinking, again, kind of on the management scale. I know this is a busy map, but that's kind of the point. There's a lot of information that we can provide, a lot of things that you guys can use to think through some of these questions. So this is the exact same area as the last map, but we're now looking at the possible impacts on soil carbon from management from harvesting activities as well. And we can think about what that says about site quality. So you remember Luke mentioned that a lot of these plantations tend to be on poorer quality sites. They make good restoration opportunities. And looking at the map, you can see that a fair amount of them pop up on those kind of neutral or slightly vulnerable soils, anything that shows up in tan or in brown. And you can imagine that your restoration tactics in those places are going to be very different than in a plantation that shows up on the kind of teal colored soils, where you are likely to see gains in soil carbon from active management. So you might then see even more gains from the restoration work, or your tactics, at least in those places, would be different. So this is really where you want to start using whatever kind of local knowledge you have as forest managers or soil scientists, and start to think about what might be the best tactic here. This is where this map and the table that we have also created are not meant to be used in isolation, but they're supposed to be inputs that can help you make some of these management decisions. Next slide, please. So just to zoom in one more time to give you a little bit of a teaser about how this works, kind of back at that project level that we started off talking about. You can imagine if you're managing this chunk of Baraga State Forest, you want to get a better sense of where the different types of soils are within your management unit. You can think about the restoration opportunities that exist both on your lands or next to your lands. You could use this in planning out harvest blocks or starting to understand if you're going to be managing in a certain area and those soils are likely to gain soil carbon, that might lead you to a different set of tactics that you can add. Or maybe it means that the tactics you're going to implement when you're harvesting are already okay for soil carbon. Or if you're in some of those areas where you might lose a little bit of soil carbon in your topsoils, you can think about some of those tactics, leaving slash on site, for example, that might help protect those soils or help accumulate soil carbon again after the harvest. Next slide, please. So we've talked about a lot of different things you can do with all of this data. At the end of the day, though, we've really done all this work to try to provide some useful information for all of you as you're thinking about your forest management goals, your policy goals, maybe even your climate goals. We are, after all, talking about carbon, and there's so much carbon in soils that we really should be at least aware of what's happening to those that carbon pool when we're managing in the forest. So because this is such an important pool of carbon in the forest, there are a few ways that we could think of that we'd recommend thinking about this in the kind of policy and management planning level. So one possible action would be to establish explicit soil carbon goals for forest management. These don't have to be quantitative. You could set restoration acreage targets, for example, if you wanted to, but you can also just emphasize that thinking about soil carbon is important, or it should become standard practice for forest managers. Or you could set goals to use some of the tactics identified in our table in your forest management activities. A second action would be to take those goals and integrate them into your existing policies or practices or procedures. Including soil carbon, maybe in a state forest action plan, is a good step from the policy level. There are other places to include it as well, like in BMPs or management guidelines. We can also think about this from a kind of programmatic angle. If you really want to encourage some of that pine restoration on private lands, for example, you could investigate whether there are existing private landowner programs that you can leverage to get people engaged in that kind of activity. Or you could start some statewide mineland restoration initiative to get forests growing on those inactive minelands that we mapped and start to get soil carbon gains from all of that work. So the point here is really that a lot of the practices and the tactics that we've talked about, that we've identified, are not far off from what you're already doing. As Luke mentioned, a lot of that already fits into a lot of the BMPs that are in place. And so it may only really require some small tweaks to do even more for soil carbon across the landscape. We found in our other research in the central apps that a lot of the sustainable management standards or certification practices encompass a lot of those same tactics as well that are beneficial for soil carbon. So maybe if you're already sustainably certified or you're managing sustainably, you're probably doing a lot of good things for soil carbon already. If you're not certified or you know someone who's not, then maybe kind of moving towards that sustainable management and certification is a good way to ensure that you are getting some soil carbon benefits on the landscape and in the forest, which then in turn is just good for the forest. As Luke said, soil carbon is tied to a lot of really essential ecosystem services, water holding capacity and soil productivity and other things. The other thing you can do, if you don't want to explicitly integrate goals into existing policies and programs, you can at least think about considerations in those policies and procedures. It's basically just making sure that staff or managers are asking the question about how this action will affect soil carbon. Just trying to get that thinking a little bit institutionalized. We realize that this is not always easy for people to do. The answers are not always easy to find. And so our team is really ready to help you find ways to answer that question, to find ways to talk about how you can include soil carbon as one of the many management goals that you guys are balancing for. Now, lastly, since place matters more than practice, essentially, a key step here is to identify or map the places that matter for soil carbon. That's examples of what we've shown you today. And then use some of those guidelines or the actions in our tactics table for those places, like the abandoned mine lands, the unmanaged plantations, thinking about different harvesting practices. Our team has already produced all the maps that you saw today, the harvest impact maps, and then the identification of mine lands and plantations. And so we are going to get them online in a web platform where you can click through them yourself, you can play around, you can download them and use them in your own planning processes, you can use them in your own GIS formats. From a policy or a management perspective, again, thinking about kind of larger implementation here, this information might actually help someone at the agency level or kind of a similar entity to figure out maybe where you should be focusing your efforts and kind of limited resources to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of protecting soil carbon or enhancing it, and then by extension, your forest carbon in general. So these are just a few ideas and examples. Our team is really ready and excited to keep talking with you all about how to use this information in your management planning, how we can maybe create some new policy ideas or leverage existing ones to scale up this work at the state or the regional level. We'd love to talk about any other ideas that you might come up with you. So we are essentially here to be a resource for all of you. And with that, can we go to the last slide, please, Luke? I'd just like to thank you all for your time. You can feel free to email Luke or I with any questions or ideas that you have. And I think we have about 10 minutes left for questions.
Indeed, we do. And there have been some good ones in the chat. Thank you all for just knowing what to do and putting those there. I realized upon reading them, I didn't say a word about it. But this seems to be how people are doing things in Zoom life. Amanda and Mark asked the question that is always the first question in every one of these talks we give. All right, what about time? How long does it take to recover? Or how long of a time frame are your data from? When we're pulling in data, whether from published studies or from FIA plots, regardless of the source, that's all range of ages. That could be a year ago, that could be 10 years ago, could be many decades of comparing a reforesting site to a cultivated site, or a harvested forest to an unharvested forest. And one of the things we always test for is whether there is any sort of a time series. Is there a recovery period? Is there a gain followed by a loss? And almost never are we able to resolve time frame. So that's one of the least satisfying answers I have to give again and again. The data aren't there to provide that kind of guidance at this kind of scale. If you're lucky enough to have had a really good site level study done on your forest or something that looked at a chronosequence or something of that nature, you can start to infer the timescales over which these changes happen. Based on other work in soil carbon turnover and cycling that I do with collaborators, I think it's likely that these losses that we see in topsoils or the potential for any gains with reforestation, these are probably many decades to a century. In the case of reforestation on a cropland, it might be several centuries. This just based on what we know about the turnover time, the residence time of carbon in different parts of soil profiles. It's probably many decades to a couple of centuries. If you're talking about O horizons, those are probably more like a matter of decades. But we really can't say that as a confident quantitative estimate. Amy Aman made a good point, and despite her best efforts to school me on BMPs and regulations that she works with on the Ottawa National Forest, I did not know that adding slash residues to wet depressions goes against BMPs. Amy, what's the thinking on that? What's the justification for keeping residues out of wet places? You care to speak?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It might not be like all wet places. It might just be mostly like the seasonal pond focus. It just kind of was the first thing that popped into my mind as something to investigate further. But it's interesting.
Thank you.
Vernal pools are important wildlife habitat.
Yeah, thank you, Phil, for that. And this is a point that I didn't make, but which your comments remind me to make now is my job is easy in terms of focusing on carbon, and I recognize that quite often there are trade-offs. You know, the carbon piece we can address. There are other aspects, other desired future conditions. There are other constraints that you operate with, and we hope to offer this as one piece. And we are illuminated when you share other constraints like these with us and help us understand limitations or unintended consequences. One thing that Mark Haiti, you made a really succinct statement here that I think is really the thesis of our work. Good soil management in general is good soil carbon management. And the main role that we see ourselves as playing is providing the evidence for that. So many BMPs, so much experience that people have is just experiential. It's not necessarily based on data, on evidence. And our role as scientists is to provide the evidence that shows what you said is in fact true. Good soil management is good soil carbon management. And perhaps also to show you where those rules of thumb are likely to be more important than others. As regards that, I got to jump ahead to Jim's comment. The harvest impacts layer, that's available right now. Matt Peters of our group helped in getting that onto the Forest Service Research Data Archive. You can download the geodatabase for that today and work with it. And this presentation has the link for that. I will make this presentation available to anyone who wants it. The Minelands and Plantation piece is forthcoming. Now, as to the plantation restoration, we don't really define what that means. I think, so first of all, I've just got to tell you more about how we recognize these things. This is mostly remote sensing. Satellites and algorithms are good at picking up straight rows of evergreens. So this is reforestation from, you know, post No Pablo, Jack Pine, all the way out to old CCC plantation. This is all ages of plantations. We offer them as a possible target because we hear a lot of people talking about different things that can be done to pine plantation. Should they be parklands? Should they be barrens? Should they be converted back to hardwoods when they're planted on good sites where they really don't belong? And in that regard, what we would suggest is to look at the underlying geodata for these harvest impacts is soil parent material and texture. And to think about, if you have a pine plantation and you're talking about doing a project there, if that project is harvesting, well, if that's a harvest on a pine plantation, which is it in fact on a poor soil? Is it on an outwash plain of a sandy loam texture? Well, you should probably be careful in there. That's going to be the most vulnerable kind of site, as one example. Yeah, just got to refer to Amanda Cooper's question. Business as usual harvest practices. Is that what's causing the gains on teal colored soils? I don't really know. We collected data from all manner of harvesting practices, whatever we could find in the case of published papers. We can't tell what practices were used when we're looking at FIA data or at NRCS PEDONs, where our understanding of harvesting is just based on remote sensing. On average, across all harvest practices, those teal covered soils, those fine textured glaciolacustran soils, those just tend to gain topsoil carbon. And perhaps one way to use the tactics table would be to think about ways that if you have some average probability that harvesting is going to increase it, what are the things you can do to go above and beyond to really ensure that, maximize your residue retention, or think about what kind of machinery you'll allow in there, and so on. Wow, lots more questions than I'll get to today. Yeah, great points about the vernal pools, of course. I want to address briefly Mark's question about how can there be a loss of topsoil carbon but no impact on the whole profile? Well, that's how it shakes out of the data. Topsoils tend to have 15 to 30% of soil carbon stocks of the whole profile in our soils. And if you get a 15% loss in a part of the profile that's 15% of the profile, that's that's about 6% of your whole profile. It's really difficult to detect the influence of even a significant loss in a small horizon. That's why, depending on your perspective, from a carbon accounting perspective, it may not matter. The whole profile, the body of soil is unchanged. If you're on a fragile site where you really need that topsoil organic matter to hold on to moisture, to hold on to nutrients, that 15% loss might be really important. That's up to your judgment, your risk tolerance. I feel the need to, okay, I'll just let me say before I get going on Eli's question, Kendall and I are eager to work with any and all of you on an individual level if you want to implement any of these findings. If you can't get the paper, let us know. We'll send it to you. If you're having difficulties with the geodata, let us know. I will make this recording and this presentation available. Please be in touch. We care about the same things and we want to help. So to those of you who must leave, do so, and thank you for participating. If you want to hang on for another minute, I will take a swing at Eli's question. My guess for the processes causing soil carbon gains on the fine soils, thank you, Dan. These tend to be clayey, so clays are good at complexing with organic matter. They tend to be wet, so saturation. Thank you, Julie. Between the wetness and the capacity of clays to stabilize organic matter, these are likely factors that promote those soil carbon gains, though a third might also be porosity. It's important not to underestimate the importance of aerobic respiration. Gases, oxygen just doesn't get as far down into the soil in a wet, fine textured soil. So you get that much more protection from decomposition as you have residues fragmenting and moving downwards, as you have roots that die and remain lodged down in the soil. I think it's probably structural protection of carbon and perhaps wetness. Thank you, Nick. Thank you all for participating in this. And please be in touch.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. And this is Eli. I appreciate the answer to that question. It sounds like it's all about aerobic respiration, like you said, and different rates of aerobic restoration after disturbance. At least that's the way I'm interpreting your results. It sounds right. Does that sound right?
And the great limitation of our methods is, of course, that we cannot actually know what was the mechanism. We don't have an experiment here, but based on other work on soil carbon, I think it's got something to do with the accessibility to microbes. Amy, thank you so much. It'll be great to see you soon. And Mark, thank you. Yep, I agree. Context matters. Context matters. We have to be specific when we're talking about soil carbon impacts. And I hope that this helps you do that in your work.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Anna. Take care. Till next we meet.